And yeah, last time, if you weren't here in the last meeting, so we built this sort of, we built off of a starter code that they had already set up for us, which was this one over here. And that was pretty cool. And for the most part, what we built was this sort of, it's stuff that has data that's already inputted into the starter code, but you have these rows and these grids that are horizontal. You have a search bar, non-functional, and then you have a bottom navigation. So it was kind of just getting the feel for separating things that are similar, right? So like these cells and these cells, and making them reusable for our apps, and also adding a scaffold, is what they call it in Compose, to be able to, drop in this bottom navigation, all these different things. So we went through basically the search bar, the different sections individually, how to input the different reusable cells into our home section, etc. And it was pretty cool. Then they talked about navigation rail, which was the landscape mode navigation bar essentially. And that's why you see it here on the left hand side. So it's for wider screens, you have tablets, stuff like that. So it was pretty cool. And then towards the end, we talked about like window sizing, how you can adjust for that, etc. If you want to dive into this, you should be able to click out of there, basic layouts and compose, or the X, and it'll take you back here. It'll be implement real world design. That's the code that we did last. So now we're going to be getting started with state. And for this one, I'm assuming it's going to be just state management stuff. So let's take a look. If there's any videos, that's going to be for you to watch. I think that, for the sake of the meeting, I think it would be better if we just skip that, of course. I'll read stuff, more or less. Like I won't read it all because there's not a, study hall or anything like that. But we want to talk about it. We want to sort of be collaborative about it. So if you something catches your attention, please feel free to unmute, etc. So this codelab explains the core concepts related to using state and Jetpack Compose, and they linked something here, which is just basically like a sort of a Google guide on state for Jetpack Compose. I guess extra reading material. It shows you how the app state determines what is displayed in the UI, right? And we've seen it before. For example, a button click, if you have the button do something like expand a view, for example, and you don't remember the state, it won't really do that expansion. Like it'll do it, but you won't really see it because it won't retain that state on recomposition. So for the most part, there's going to be a lot of that management when it comes to our UI. So let's take a look here. How Compose updates the UI when state changes by working with different APIs. How to optimize the structure of our composable functions and using view models in a composed world. We haven't even dived too deep into view models. We've talked about state hoisting a little bit, but not really too much. So I think, Javier, for example, you joined at the perfect time. We're probably going to dive into the meaty parts of Compose now, so this is good. Prerequisites, not much. No Kotlin, basic understanding of Compose. I mean, Compose, you could see it in the code, and you'll see certain things that just make sense. It'll say like text. Oh, okay, that's a text composable, Basic understanding of architecture components, view model. If you're not familiar with view model and you have any questions, obviously feel free to let us know. But for the most part, it'll behave the same way, right? This will be like sort of how we want to interact with our UI, right? You want that unidirectional flow. So from the UI, you have an interaction from the user. It'll go to the view model. The view model will say, hey, let's do something with this, or here's a new state, and it'll go back to the UI and update. That's essentially what's going to be happening. What you'll learn, obviously they talk about different things. State and events, state to determine which elements to display, what state hoisting is, perfect. Stateful and stateless, etc., etc. So let's dive in. We'll be building, seems like a task tracker. So it has the ability to add tasks. I'm not sure how they're numbered, but we'll see soon. They have a checkbox, and you're able to remove them. Cool. The app has two main functionalities: a water counter to track your water intake, and a list of wellness tasks to do throughout the day. Cool. So there's a video here. Again, feel free to watch this afterwards. I'm sure these videos are really informational. I usually watch them before or after. But for the most part, during the meeting, we're just going to go ahead and skip that. All right, so let's start a new Compose project. I think right now we don't really have anything pending, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So let me go ahead and switch over to Android Studio. And we're just going to go ahead and say new project. And I don't know if they want a specific name, so let's see. Basic state codelab. Sure, I'll stay with that. All right, so that project should be loading in a second. And then let's go ahead and take a look at what else we might be needing. So I'll switch over. This is the project. And I'll switch over to here. When you choose empty compose activity template, on Android Studio will set up obviously the main activity, Android manifest, and then the Gradle.kts. Cool. And there's a solution. So if you want to see the solution right, this is going to be it. I'll go ahead and link it in the chat as well. But for now, I'll go ahead and skip the solution. I might reference this, so I'll go ahead and open it on the side just to make sure that we're on the right track, if that makes sense. Any questions so far? Awesome. Cool. I'm sure you already did this, Bismarck. So you're going to be my guide, if anything. But awesome. Good to hear. So let's take a look. Next. State and compose. So an app state is any value that can change over time. Makes sense. It's a broad definition and encompasses everything from a room database to a variable and a class, right? We've seen it with certain variables when we want to say like, oh, has this expanded? Boolean, true or false. All Android apps display state to the user. A few examples of state in an Android app are most recent messages, of course, user's profile photo, scroll position, like we talked about earlier. State determines what is shown in the UI at any particular time. Makes sense. So let's see what it looks like. So we're going to go ahead and, some tips here, I guess. You can add all Kotlin files in the root package of the app module. In a production app, however, files should be logically structured. Obviously, they're basically just saying like, for the sake of this, go ahead and drop it in one class if you want to, right? But obviously they should be separated based on their concerns, on architectures that you want to set up, right? You'll hard code all strings inline in snippets. In a real app, obviously you would have string resources in the strings XML file. And we might even do that, somewhat. I don't know. But if we get the chance, we can go ahead and dive into some best practices. The first piece of functionality you need to build is a water counter to count the number of glasses you consume during the day. Okay, so we're going to create a composable function called water counter. So let's start with that first. And we're going to drop that in the main activity, as they said. So we have our theme here. We have our surface. We don't need greeting anymore, so this is going to go away. I'll just take all of this away. Or for the most part, we can just rename it, I guess. And we have, hello, Pablo. How's it going? Gonna go ahead. Good. No, you're good, man. We actually just got into the project. So here, I'm gonna send you the link. Pablo is our resident expert with Pedro too. So if you have any questions, let us know. So we're creating this app. We're diving into state and we're creating this app. It's just a task tracker, so nothing major. But we're gonna dive obviously into state, especially with the checkbox and deletion, etc. So as of right now, all they want us to do is create a function called a water counter that contains a text composable. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'm gonna just rename this to water counter. And this is obviously gonna be water counter preview. Water counter. And then here they want a text composable that displays the number of glasses. So the number of glasses should be stored in a value called count, which can be hard coded for now. So they basically want this, essentially. And I don't like to just copy it outright, so I'm gonna go ahead and just do this the same way that they did it. But for the most part, they want a text composable here, and then that text composable is gonna have the text and a modifier that we're passing with some padding. Cool. So let's do that. Oops, text is equal to, modifier is equal to. And then for the most part, obviously here, like this is not gonna be necessary. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove it from here as well. This string name that was in the greetings function. Let me see if I need to import this. Should be this one, right? Yeah. And then what is it missing? Text and then that. Okay, cool. So you've had count glasses is what they want to say. Cool. Oops. Glasses. And the modifier, they want the padding. So let's go ahead and save modifier padding 16 dp. Need to import it. Oh, it imported. Cool. All right, so let me go ahead and just refresh that build so we can go ahead and see the preview on it. But pretty simple so far. So we have a variable count. That variable has nothing in it. I'm assuming, right, as we add along, they're gonna have us see what it looks like when we try to increase the counter without using state. So we've had 0 glasses. Cool. Let's take a look at what else. It's good practice to provide a default modifier to all composable functions as it increases your reusability. And we've seen that before. We basically add a modifier for pretty much everything. It should appear as the first optional parameter in the parameter list after all required parameters. Cool. All right, so they want us to create wellness screen, the next composable functions. And this one's gonna be basically representing the main screen and call water counter. So instead of doing it directly from here, the wellness one is gonna be the one that calls water counter. So we're just gonna go ahead and say fun wellness screen, I believe it was. And again, we're just gonna set up that default modifier. We're gonna make it a composable function. And then they want us to call water counter from here. Yeah, I'm passing the modifier, of course. Modifier, there you go. So any questions so far from what we're doing? Does that make sense? Awesome. Awesome. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a preview, and this preview is just gonna be the for the wellness screen. But I will use show system UI as well, since it's a screen. I'm just gonna go ahead and pretend that it looks like one. So composable wellness screen preview. And then that's gonna call, of course, the water counter. So it's similar to this, but I guess this one shouldn't really have that, or I guess it doesn't matter. But now we're gonna have this huge screen here, so we can kind of see what it looks like with the system UI. All right, let's take a look at what else. So open main activity. Oh, I thought we were already. Oh, okay, so they want us to create a separate file for these. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, so we're gonna extract this that we did, and we're just gonna make them separate files. They told us to drop them in the root class, so we're just gonna go ahead and do that. But I have a question. So Pablo, we created these 2 composable functions. They want a separate file for each. Makes sense. And they said not to worry about architecture. Drop them in the root folder. But where would you put these? Okay. Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Gotcha. I mean, for now, obviously, we're just going to follow this, but I wanted to know because it makes sense. I mean, a lot of people do it differently. I've seen people put it in components directories. I've seen people put it in feature directories, kind of like the screens, like you mentioned. Right. Right. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and do this. I'll drag it over here. And then we'll do the same for the wellness screen. So let's go ahead and take all this. Create a new class. We're going to call it wellness screen. And just drop it all in here. Main activity, we're just going to call wellness screen for now. And yeah, we'll do that for now. And then let's see what else they're asking for. So in the main activity, remove greeting. We already did that. Call a newly wellness screen composable and send this activities set content block like this. So we already did that as well. And then let's see. Yeah, so they're basically talking about the theming that we talked about before in other meetings. That it depends on how the project is named, of course. For this one, obviously, like we have basic state codelab theme because that's the name that they gave us. If we run the app now, we'll just see like the wellness screen, which should be calling the water counter, which should be just saying you've had 0, right? There's not going to be anything else to it. I'm actually not even going to run it because I know for a fact this is going to show that. Makes no sense. But over time, we're going to be adding like the button to add more glasses, right? And the task, I guess, counter as well. Any questions so far? Awesome. Good to hear. All right, so let's see. The water counter composable function is the variable count, right? So that's what so the state of the water counter, right? So that variable that we talked about that's set to 0, right now, even if we were to add a button and increase it, right, it's supposed to track it, but yeah, without state, it's not going to be able to remember that. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Having a static state is not useful as it cannot be modified. So to remedy this, we'll add a button to increase the count and track the amount of glasses of water throughout the day, right? So any action that causes modification of the state is called an event, right? Any user interaction, anything that has to do with like nudging, right? The view model, essentially, in this case. We don't have one yet, but that's what they talked about earlier. So let's take a look at what else. So we talked about state as any value changes over time. For example, the last messages received in a chat app. But what causes a state to update? So the user interacting with the UI by pressing a button, for example, or other factors, right? Like sensors, sending a new value, network responses, anything that really updates any existing state, essentially. So while the state of the app offers a description of what to display on the UI, events are the mechanisms through which the state changes, resulting in changes to the UI. So they're basically saying that state is what we have to display essentially to our UI, right? Whatever we have in terms of like information for the UI to display, that's what state is essentially. And the events are what trigger these states to change, right? So that's pretty much a breakdown of it. If it's still confusing, I could I could try to come up with a different analogy, but I think most of us got it here. So, but please let me know. Yeah, so this is pretty much what it looks like. So you have event, update state, display state, and then just keeps going in a loop. So it's all the same stuff here. So I'm just not gonna read that again. I'm gonna go ahead and keep going. So go to the water counter composable function to add the button below our label text. A column will help vertically align the text, obviously. So yeah, they just basically want it to be set like this. So we're in the water counter already. We're gonna go ahead and add a column. And our column is basically going to take in this text and a new button, essentially. And Pablo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in this case, like we want to pass the modifier here directly, the one that we get from the function, right? And then here, this one would be just like a new sort of instance of a modifier. Is that correct? Or does it not matter? Right. Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. All right, cool. So we'll do that. And then for the actual button, let's see what they want. So you can create, you can move. Okay, cool. So we have the column, the button, the text, etc. The button composable function receives an on-click, which we see here. And this is the event, right? So this is basically the interaction with the user. So here we want to change the count of var, right? Instead of val, so we can actually mutate it. And I'm assuming they're just gonna go ahead and increment. So let's take a look. Yeah, count plus plus, it's an increment. And then the text will say add 1. So the text being the text for the button, this is what it's gonna show. So it's gonna say add 1. Here, we're gonna increase the count. And yeah, let's take a look at what it looks like, right? So when we try to increase the count without remembering the state, let's take a look at what happens, essentially. So it's building, it's building. All right, so it says you've had 0 glasses, right? And we click add 1, nothing's happening, right? Even though we're increasing the count technically. So let's go back to what they're saying. The onClick event past the button uses the Kotlin lambda syntax, right? So that whole onClick, and then I guess they wanted a modifier for the padding. That's fine. I'll add it now, but for the most part, when you run the app, yeah, we're seeing that same sort of interaction where you're clicking, nothing's happening, right? So let's take a look. Oh, and they wanted the padding actually outside of here. So let's go ahead and add that. 16dp. So they didn't want one for the text, I guess. Yeah, no, they don't. And then for the onClick, for the button, they wanted a modifier. So we're gonna go ahead and say onClick modifier top is equal to, what does it say, 8dp? 8dp. All right. Yeah, so for the most part, same result. Let's take a look at what happens after. So memory and a composable function. So compose apps transform data. We refer that to the composition, right? So that's the initial state or life cycle of a composable function, composition. Then you have the recomposition, right? This is basically when a state change happens. So again, going back, when some sort of variable or anything like that changes that we're using for the UI to modify, it'll recompose essentially. So it'll re-execute everything for the affected composable functions and recompose. Compose also looks at what data an individual composable needs so that it only recomposes components whose data has changed and skips those that are not affected. Now, we haven't even dived into that, but I believe if, for example, we have a list of 10 items and we modify the data for an item before, like we delete, for example, an item at the beginning of that list, and it has to move the other composables, I think it recomposes those as well. Is that right, Pablo? So like, and when it comes to recomposition, it mentions here that only the items that are affected by the state change recompose, right? But I believe in a list, if you were to modify like one of the earlier items, let's say remove them completely, and the others have to shift up, that those others would also get recomposed. Is that correct? Right. 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 Mm. Right. Mm. Right. 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 Mm. Yeah. And so, yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Gotcha. Right. Oh, gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of a little bit of iOS like development when I think it's called like diffable data. Like it uses sort of like IDs to track the changes, and once the ID changes, then it knows okay, we need to I guess recompose it. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's great to hear, and yeah, what you said is perfect. Like on Kotlin you have val whatever, but then you have oh, it's a mutable list. So the list itself could change, not the type. Of course, it's still like mutable list or whatever, but the actual list itself can definitely change. Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's insightful to hear. So thank you for that. All right, so Compose needs to know what state to track, right? Compose is a special state tracking system that reads a particular state. So using Compose state and mutable state types to make state observable by Compose. So they keep track of each composable that reads state value properties, etc. You can use mutable state of function to create an observable mutable state. Makes sense. So they basically want to add this mutable state for our account, so that they're tracked by Compose. So let's take a look at that. We're gonna go ahead and say yeah, we're gonna make our account a mutable state type int, and then we're just gonna call the actual function itself, which is mutable state of, with int inside of it, with the int value inside of it. And I believe, so it's throwing this little error which says creating a state object during composition without using remember, right? And we've seen that before. For the most part we have, but let's take a look at what it looks like here. So, or if they talk about it in the first place. So this is the same warning that we got. This is a valid warning that we'll explain and fix shortly. Cool. So we can ignore it for now. It says, as mentioned earlier, any changes to count schedules a recomposition of any composable functions that read counts value automatically. In this case, water counter is recomposed whenever the button is clicked. So if we were to run again, they're saying that nothing would happen. I don't even think that it'll let us run, but let's try. Yeah, so it's still throwing obviously the error that we just saw, which is that, well, I guess it's throwing a big decimal define mismatched error or something like that. But for the most part, this is the only thing that we really see that's sticking out. So we're gonna go ahead and skip forward, see what happens. So scheduling recompositions is working fine. However, when a recomposition happens, the variable count is reinitialized back to 0. So we need to find a way to preserve that. So it's basically like saying it's not being cached. Like this thing is, we're trying to tell it, hey, go ahead and update, but it's going to recompose. So it's going to reinitialize this function. So it starts at 0 again. That's pretty much what's happening. So we can go ahead and use the remember keyword to basically make this state rememberable, essentially, right? And the way we use it is by saying this. So we keep the same type, mutable state int, but we're gonna say remember and pass the initial value, essentially. So if we say remember and use those function braces, I guess a unit brace, then the error is gone. If we rerun it, it should be not throwing that error anymore. Oh, actually, we're getting this because of the ++ now, actually, if I'm not mistaken. So for this one, it's going to be, what is it? Value plus equals 1 or something like that, I guess we could do. Or is there a different, I'm not even sure. Is there, yeah, dot value ++. Same thing. Dot value ++. Shorthand. All right, let's go ahead and run it and see what happens. So now, oh, it's still not doing it. Okay. So what's going on now? Is it because of the var? It is, I think. All right, let's rerun it. Okay, so now we're saying that this text is saying you've had mutable state because we are passing the count directly. So we're going to go ahead and pass the count value. Let's run it again. So it's still doing the same thing. And I wonder why. But let's take a look here. All right. So far we have the same thing, I think, for the most part, which is we have a val count. We're using the remember keyword. We're using the mutable state of for the initial of 0. And then we're just increasing the value by 1. You can use the by keyword to define count as a var. That's basically saying this. Var count by the remember. Adding the delegates, getter, and setter imports lets us read and mutate count indirectly without explicitly referencing mutable state's value property every time. So that's basically to be able to remove that count.value issue that we saw earlier. I think that might be a nice way to go about it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we're just going to say, yeah, go ahead. Maybe it's my Anderson. Oh, look, it's doing it. It's doing it. So this right here, It's the class itself. What do you mean? Like we have the count here. This is a val. Yeah, immutable state. Can you see that there? Figure it out. Yeah. Yeah. It was working. It was working. So, yeah, I don't know why. So when yeah, maybe it could be. Yeah, maybe. That's a good call up. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, when I ran it, I literally reran the same code and then it worked randomly. So, yeah, it could be an import. You know, could be my Android Studio is like lagging behind or something. Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, man. That was we were there for a while. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's fine. Like, and I think either way, I wanted to try this out. But I remember just to remove the whole count thing. I mean, the value. Yeah. So we'll leave it at that, and then this should be, I think, no, top, yeah. So this is fine there. And then, yeah, let's take a look at what else. This is complaining about, oh, the curly braces. All right. So this is what it looks like now. Cool. Yeah, pick the syntax that makes the most sense, whatever. I mean, that's all preference, of course. Now let's examine what we've done so far. We've defined the variable with remember, of course, created the text display and added the button. And, that's pretty cool. We are able to deal with state now, do some interaction with the button, display that interaction right through these events. And then, yeah, so far our counter is working. So let's see what else. They also reference here different observable types like live data, state flow, and flow. And of course, Rx Java's observable to store its state in the app. I think I've definitely seen like a lot of use of state flow recently and flow as well. Live data I haven't seen in a while, but I'm not sure if that's just from my experience. But right, yeah. For the most part, I think the way to go has been probably state flow and flow, if I'm not mistaken. But that's what I've seen anyway. And even on the Google, guides, they've definitely talked about a little bit of the differences between live data and state flow. So if you're interested, you could definitely dive into that. State-driven UI. So this is talking about how Compose basically is a declarative UI framework, and here you have like the life cycle, right? So before, obviously, in the activity and fragment life cycles, you still have like the whole on create view, on view created, all that stuff. Here for Compose, it's pretty simple. You have an initial composition, you recompose 0 or more times, and then you leave that composition. That's pretty much it. So there's not much to it. And this is for every composable function, if I'm not mistaken. So anything that has that annotation, composable, this is it. So this approach avoids the complexity of manually updating the views, of course. This all makes sense. If a composable function is called during the initial composition or in recompositions, we say it is present in the composition. A composable function that is not called, for example, like if it's called inside of an if statement or anything like that, or it's not met the condition to show it, it's called an absent, or it's called absent from the composition. So cool. I didn't know there was a keyword for those two, but good to know. And then what else? Yeah, if the UI is what the user sees, the UI state is what the app says they should see. Makes sense. So the output of the composition is this tree structure that describes the UI. I think you talked about this a little bit. And then you can inspect the app's layout generated by Compose by using the layout inspector tool. I think we We might have done this before. I feel like we have. We've definitely seen stuff like that, but I think the layout inspector, let me see if I can show it real quick. On this new theme, I might have changed like the location. I don't know if you're on this yet, Pablo, but let me see if it's here. Yeah, layout inspector. So I found it here in the more tools windows. And then here it shows like the different, if I were to click on the button, I think it'll show, yeah, exactly where it is. So you have the material theme, you have the surface, you have the wellness screen with the 16 dp padding all around, the water counter, right? That's pretty much what the wellness screen is calling. So it's all of that. Then we have the column, text, button, and then the button text inside. So that's pretty cool. I don't use that often, but I mean, I probably should. This would probably help me a lot. But yeah, it's good to know. And then let's see what else. All right, so we've basically ran the app. We've seen that. We've seen the layout inspector. Oh wait, can you interact with it? That'd be interesting to see. Do I have it open? I think I do. Yeah, layout inspector. So they want us to click on the button or something. Is there a... What is this? All right, I must have missed something. Let me see, let me take a look here. So run the app and open the layout inspector. So they want us to run the app, open the layout inspector, and I think it'll update there as well. Let's take a look. So I'll increase the size so we can see it a little bit better. And then I'll open up the layout inspector. And then I'll click the button. And it actually updates there. Cool. We'll see the actual text update. Awesome. I didn't know I would do that. All right, let's see what else. We'll do... Yeah, run the app now, change the state. Okay, so they want us to do this real quick, which is basically add an enabled modifier. I don't even know what they call it, an enable state per se, to basically, and it's part of the button, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. Yeah, enabled. So basically that'll tell us if it's less than, so they want it to be less than 10. So if it's less than 10, the count, oh, I put modifier. If it's less than 10, we want to basically disable it, right? And that's pretty much all it is. So count less than 10. So it's only enabled if the count is less than 10. So let's go ahead and rerun that, make sure that it's working. The button state should obviously change. It'll turn gray and stuff like that. So right here. And then the next one, there you go. We've reached 10 glasses, so it's disabled. I can't click on it anymore. Cool. So we'll do this last one here, and then we'll end things on time. But any questions so far? Awesome. This has been a pretty fun one, even though we haven't done much, but it's good to learn all these things. So remember, stores objects in the composition and forgets the object if the store's location where remember is called is not invoked again during recomposition. I have no idea what that means, but we'll take a look now. So to visualize this behavior, you'll implement the following piece of functionality in the app. So when the user has had at least one glass of water, we want to display a wellness task for the user to do that they can also close. Cool. Because composable should be small and reusable, create a new composable called wellness class items that displays the wellness task displayed on the string received as a parameter, along with a close icon button. Cool. So we're going to create a new class, and it's going to be called wellness task item. wellness task item. And this is going to be just a function, so this will take a couple things, but we'll go back to that in a second. Composable. So they wanted to take string as a parameter. So it's going to be the task name. So the task name will be a string. Task name of type string. They also want a close icon button, I guess. Well, they want us to add this following code, so let's take a look at this. So they want onClose to be a unit, of course, basically, so that when the user, taps on that task, essentially, we'll be able to tell it, hey, go ahead and close this out, essentially, or remove the item or whatever it is. So we're gonna add onClose. Oops, onClose. Yeah, it's gonna be a unit. Yeah, there it is. I'm like, I wrote that wrong completely. And then the modifier, of course. Of type modifier. Man, these imports today. Alright. So they want a row, of course, so we can have some text for the task. Then we're going to have the actual button. So it's going to be a row. It's going to have stuff inside, but first we're going to go ahead and say modifier is equal to modifier. And make sure this is imported. We're going to have some text. And we're going to have that icon button. Come on now. There you go. Yeah, so the text itself, we want to basically say the task name. That's all it is. So we're going to go ahead and say text is equal to task name. And then the modifier is going to be equal to, I think they just wanted we haven't dived into weight yet, but we'll go ahead and add that for now. So modifier weight and then padding it for the start, 16 dp. Cool. What is it? 1F was it? Float? Yeah. Padding start is equal to 16 dp. There you go. All right, cool. So far so good. And then the icons field closed with a content description closed. Cool. What is this called? Yeah, the icon itself. So icon. Is it a painter or I think it's a vector, right? Image vector? Probably. Let's take a look. Icons, filled, close. Yeah. And then this is going to say close for the content. Cool. The onClick is going to be the actual onClose. So whenever they click on that button, we're going to go ahead and call that onClose. And that's it. Do they want us to run it? No, not yet. And we should probably display what it looks like. So let's take a look at a preview for this. We're going to go ahead and say preview, show background true. Let me stop this for now. Composable. Fun. What is this called again? Wellness task item. Preview. It's going to be the basic theme. And just call wellness task item. I think for this one we could just say task name, task number 1 with a string, of course. And we'll just leave it at that for now, just to see if it's previewing. And it should look like this. So let's take a look. So to improve our app with more features, update the water counter to show the wellness task item when count is greater than 0. So yeah, our stuff looks similar to that. Oh, the vertical alignment. That's what I missed. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me put it up here. Vertical alignment is equal to alignment center vertically. So that should shift the task name to the center there. And everything else, of course. And then for the most part, they wanted us to go back to the water counter. So if our count is greater than 1, we display that task. Do they want it to display underneath? Let me see. So when our counter is greater than 0, define a variable, show task, that determines whether or not to show the wellness task item, and initialize it to true. Let's see. Add a new if statement to the to show if the task is true. Use the APIs you learned in the previous sections to make sure show task survives recompositions. Cool. So show task is a newer stuff that we're going to be using. Just going to go ahead and do the same thing here. So it's going to be show task by remember. And it's going to be Boolean essentially. So mutable state of. And now this one, basically if the counter, so I guess we could probably do it. I guess we could probably set the value to, no, that's fine. This is the initial state, so that's fine. But we do want to modify it so that within the within our water counter, if the count is greater than 0, we want to go ahead and show or update that show task essentially. I guess one way to do that would be out here, but I'm curious, Pablo, what do you think? Because we have the on click here, and this is where we modify the increments. But I want to know, where would you put that? Yeah. So what would it make more sense, I guess? So we have show task, and show task is a Boolean, right? And the only time that it'll show true is if our count is greater than 0. So if we click it once, it should show a task pretty much. Yeah. And I know that we could do that here, of course, like inside, technically. And I know that we could also do it out here, I guess, technically, but like on click or whatever. Yeah. Right, like this. Right. Right. Okay. Okay, gotcha. All right, cool. So, yeah, I guess more complicated. All right, so we'll do it here for now. So show task is equal to basically saying count is greater than 0. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. If that's the case, then obviously show task should be true. And if that's the case, then I guess we show the actual task item. But I don't know where they want it to be, so let's take a look. So this is the way they did it here. It's a little different from the way that we did it, but I mean, that's fine. So here they said if count is greater than 0. So yeah, they don't even create the show task variable. They basically want it to be, if the count is greater than 0, at that point, go ahead and set the state of show task to true. And if show task is true, then go ahead and show the task item. Now, I mean, that's curious because, I mean, we just talked about it, of course, and it makes sense. For the most part, the reason I had gone with this in the first place, in my mind, was that we want it to be dynamic. We want it to be, sort of like as we go along with the user events. And here, when we say if count is greater than 0, I'm wondering, why they chose this route for the most part, because we're basically saying like, oh, at this point it's true. Like if count is greater than 0, pretty much the only reason we're creating this is to remember the state, because the actual state itself is kind of like hard coded at that point. So right. I mean, they're not following like best like best practices at the moment either. I mean, yeah. So it makes sense. Gotcha. The arrives state of. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Well, for this one, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it here because I think we're over time. But for the most part, any questions before we stop? Awesome. Well, we got pretty far. Javier, any questions? How did you enjoy the code lab so far? Yeah, or away, it's fine. Yeah. No, you're good. You're good. Awesome. Yeah, you'll definitely see me trip and do stupid stuff, but for the most part, we'll all learn together. So that's what matters. um, but that's pretty much all there is. So for now, we're gonna go ahead and leave it here. We'll continue next time with state stuff, but I'll go ahead and stop the sharing now.